Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we talk about all things Cube, but with refreshments. I am your host, Stu, or at Stu, and I'm joined by my other host,
Anthony, aka Uberbear.
And today we are rejoined by a very special guest. Welcome, Mr. Derek Gallen. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
We're good. It's good to have you on the show, man. How's life been for you in the world of Cube?
It's been pretty good. New LGS opened up recently in Manhattan and been hosting cube drafts at the LGS a couple times, trying to get a little momentum going.
Nice.
Believe it or not, there's actually a scarcity of large spaces with big tables to play Magic in Manhattan.
I can imagine that. So. Expensive real estate.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm really fortunate to have a place that's both centrally located and spacious and has air conditioning and is clean and new and all that.
So today we're going to approach a topic, and it's the inspiration for this came from a stream. If you haven't checked out one of Derek's Cube re-sleeving streams, I would thoroughly recommend it. Super chill environment to hang out and talk about Cube and all that good stuff. So that's where my inspiration came from. So before we get cracking into it, we're going to start with our usual beginning of the episode, and we're going to do our little beverage of the day. Anthony, let's start with you. What you got?
I'm having a New Belgium Voodoo Ranger Experimental IPA. How about you?
I'm also got me a Voodoo Ranger Experimental IPA. Derek, what about yourself?
Twinsies.
Well, you're not going to get the full triptych here. I have been not drinking for almost a month.
Congrats.
So I decided to get some non-alcoholic aperitifs. So I have a Gia, I don't know how to pronounce this. It's a lime and salt beverage that's like white grape juice, lime juice, yuzu, and a bunch of herbs. And, it tastes kind of bitter and sweet. It's kind of like a beer. So,
okay.
Let's crack them open.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's crack them open.
All right. So today's topic is subgames. Subgames in Magic, subgames in Cube. And I'm going to start this off with, to me, one of the most iconic, not a card that really sees a whole lot of play anymore, but I think kind of one of the poster childs for subgames because it literally creates a subgame, and that is Shahrazad. And this goes all the way back to Arabian Nights. I wasn't playing the game at this point. Anthony, maybe you were. I think Derek, pretty sure you definitely were. So for those uninitiated, Shahrazad is a white sorcery, and I'm just not going to read the entire card of this.
We're going to Oracle as we've been called out.
Basically, players play a Magic subgame using their libraries as decks. Each player who doesn't win the subgame loses half their life rounded up. This card was obviously back then when Ante was a thing, which is no longer really a thing unless you're like some crazy old school player. I don't know if really there's much Ante playing out there. Maybe there is. Maybe there's some kitchen table guys out there that are still playing Ante, but a bit of a blast from the past. But cool that it represents like this new thing that exists, right? And this is way beyond anything we're really going to talk about in this episode because it's literally all players get up and move to a new table and play a new game. But subgames is going to be the theme. And we're going to kind of do a bit of a chronological, starting with some of the newer subgame mechanics and go through to some of the older ones.
I think it's important that we define our definition of subgames.
Absolutely.
We pregame talk about this. Derek, would you like to take a stab at this, and we'll see if we can explain this?
Yeah, I think this is cool. Derek, what do you consider a subgame?
I'm going to answer that, but first I have a story about Shahrazad. If you could indulge me.
I would love to indulge you, yes.
Great. So Richard Garfield did an interview with somebody for a YouTube show, but like long enough ago that the YouTube show was just like a short almost. And this person was asked Richard Garfield a bunch of questions. One of them was about one of his favorite cards. And obviously after he said Richard Garfield PhD, which is just kind of like a meme or a joke or something, which, by the way, creates a game state of mental magic, which is a really sweet card. Also, anyway, Shahrazad. He mentions Shahrazad as one of his favorite cards. And he said, and this is just maybe a snapshot inside the creative mind of Richard Garfield, is he imagined a deck that was all planes Mox Pearls, and Shahrazad's. Those are the only 3 cards in the deck. And that you could create a game that was like the 1001, Arabian Nights, like the Tales, the endless, sort of like a game that was a story about another game that was also about another game that was also about another game, and that these sub-games would go on forever. And that he loved the idea of Shahrazad creating this experience in the game of Magic.
Very cool.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
I just love the way I love the way he thinks.
That is
it's really
a bit
wonderful.
of a glimpse into the crazy genius of Dr. Garfield's.
I'll take a stab at the question that was posed.
Go ahead.
By my definition of a sub game is anything that causes you to take time off from the main aspect of Magic, the attacking of your opponent to do a secondary or tertiary item that requires sub pieces like tokens or some special form of tracking, something that requires mental tasking for not only the opponent but the player as well to keep track of, to understand game states outside of just life totals.
Okay.
That would be my definition of a sub game. And I want to reference one more thing. So I used to play Final Fantasy VII. And
Amazing game.
love that game. It was fantastic. Until you got to the part, what was the little yellow critters? And you go in and they're doing the races, Coco Chos or Chocobo races.
Yeah, Chocobos. Chocobo racing.
Yeah, you have to forgive me. It's been since like 1997 since I played that game.
You should replay it. It's a good game.
I will. I still have it. Actually, I still have my original PlayStation disc and all that. But that was the part of the game. Like I'm in the middle of saving, the world, the universe from whatever impending doom's coming. This game, can't remember. It's been so long ago. But then suddenly I'm like, well, I have to pause and do this little like Dr. Mario nonsense race or whatever. Try to play these sideboard card games. And that was my first definition as a kid growing up, although I was 19 in the Air Force at the time, of a sub-game interaction where it detracted from my main quest.
Okay.
I think it's important to differentiate that from, say, that experience from, say, Blades of Steel, which is a Nintendo game, an ice hockey game. Because in Blades of Steel, there's a mini game inside of it. It's like a video game that you can play during like a downtime or a break or at some point during the game. The difference is in Final Fantasy VII, the Chocobo racing, your results can give you items which then you can turn into resources that help your main quest. Like you become stronger or you win something that's valuable to the game.
You mean I would have played the game better had I followed through, and I didn't. I didn't even know that. This is all news to me.
So in Blades of Steel, you can play this game, but it has no impact. I believe, I could be completely misrepresenting this, but I believe it had no impact on the actual outcome of the hockey game. Like it didn't give you a bonus, it didn't give you an edge, it didn't give you an advantage in any way.
So purely for
I think it's important to stress that maybe a way to define the subgame is that it plays like for me, maybe I could say it plays towards the eventual outcome of the game, but it is like something that it is a tracking narrative or story or like circumstance that happens within a game of Magic that you then have to track that can lead to the conclusion of the game or provide some kind of benefit to you or your opponent.
Yeah, I think that's a solid explanation, and I will say that I've always looked at it as, for me, it's things that I have to track, things that I have to take care of, things that require my attention that are sort of outside of my perceived organic board state of Magic, right? I started playing Magic during Theros. Right? A lot has changed since then. And there was a lot of things that came before I started playing that have made people just go up in arms. Like, what is this new card type? Or what is this new mechanic? Things like that. So I think maybe depending on when you started playing Magic may have a significant impact in what you perceive to be a sub-game, whether or not you might just think, hey, whatever is designed by Wizards of the Coast, whatever new mechanics, whatever new card types, whatever comes in, it's just all part of Magic and, that's fine. And maybe I've got a little bit of a personal bias in there. And like I say, going all the way back to when I was watching Derek's stream, I will say that I started to immediately, and I don't know if you remember the mechanic that I talked about, right? And because I think it was right around the time that Initiative was starting to get popular. And I was like, man, I don't know how I feel about sub games. And Derek said, and these were your exact words, he said, "What? You don't like monarchy?" Those were your exact words. Don't ask me why these kind of things stick in my craw, but it did that day. And just because that became such a narrative that I thought would be interesting to build upon for an episode. So, and it was, like I said, it was probably about a year ago, if not getting close to that we started talking about this. So I want to start with the first new mechanic or new subgame. All right, so we are in July of 2023, and the Lord of the Rings set has just released, and the One Ring has just been apparently found by someone in Canada. Congratulations to that person. And there is a mechanic, and it's called the Ring Temps You. And basically, you get this token that can represent it. It has 4 different steps of whenever your ring bearer does something, whenever your creature becomes the ring bearer, and then there's some things that happen. So to me, again, this is now a game piece that exists outside of sort of what I would consider to be normal, and there's things that need to be tracked outside of just how much mana someone has available or what creatures are on the battlefield. I'm going to start, Derek, let's go over to you. How do you feel about this one? This is a new one. Again, requires a little bit more thought process. How do you feel about this new mechanic? I know that we've mentioned this in the pregame as far as your cube is concerned, and you said this was something, I don't know if you have either considered it or you've already introduced it to your cube. Tell us how you feel about this one.
Well, I'm a big proponent of modern Magic, and I'm a big proponent of experimentation in modern Magic.
So this is modern as in modern the format and modern mechanics that are popular. This is new mechanics that you're talking about.
Yeah, like what's happening right now.
Right now, yep.
And I've lately been much more interested in embracing almost anything new that the game is trying to explore, because it's new ground, and I want to see where they're going. I want to know how the ship is being steered over at WotC. I want to see what they come up with, and if it works, and if it's fun for Cube and for Limited and whatever. Those are the 2 main formats that I play.
Sure.
And I think, I guess this is like a general statement. I'm very pro this kind of execution of a sub game, which is the Ring, I guess, or the Ring Temps You, or Tempting by the Ring, or whatever.
Sure.
Whatever song lyrics you want to apply to that. So there's a couple things I enjoy. One is that it seems to be, to me so far, much more digestible than venturing into a dungeon or going into the Undercity, which is what the initiative takes you.
Sure.
In that it is essentially one dungeon with 4 rooms, but the rooms compound upon each other. So you're not changing the state of the function of the piece. You're advancing towards an end state for the game piece. Yes.
I think it's important to break. So I've got some examples that you'll find in the show notes. And as always, I will include the show notes, which will be on our Google Drive in addition to our Discord. And I'm going to give some examples for those that are not familiar with this, so they have some kind of, as you're driving down the road on the way to work, you know what we're talking about.
You got a reference point for the card, sure.
The card that I've chosen to reference for this mechanic is Call of the Ring. For 1 colorless and 1 swamp, you get an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, the Ring Tempts You. So you get the multipliers will continue. I thought this was a good example. Whenever you choose a creature as your ring bearer, you may pay 2 life. If you do, draw a card, and a cool little flavor text that says, "The ring is mine," which I like very much, right? And let's talk about the ring. I'm going to read the ring to you, as Derek referenced, the dungeon, so everybody has a good mental picture. So going back to Call the Ring, every upkeep, you're allowed to transition and add this to your ring bearer. And there's a lot more to it. You can have multiple ring bearers. You can move this around. You can get pretty nutty with it. The ring bearer is legendary and can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. That's the first step. Step 2, or chapter 2, or whatever you want to call it. Whenever your ring bearer attacks, draw a card, then discard a card. The third step, whenever your ring bearer becomes blocked by a creature, that creature's controller sacrifices it at the end of combat. And then the fourth step, whenever your ring bearer deals combat damage to a player, each opponent loses 3 life. And one anecdotal fact, and now pardon the interruption, but I thought it was important. I thought it was interesting because during playtesting and all that, they felt if they put any negative or anything that detracted from this, people didn't want to play it. And people have had all kinds of, the internet has been it's been buzzing with how they could have improved upon this. Hindsight's 2020, right? This card's pretty neat. I get it, but there's none of the steps are true drawbacks. Nothing's really, and it goes against a lot of the flavor of the books and what actually happened to you as you withered down by wearing the ring.
Yep.
So people have had their grievances with this, but that was a slight pause for interruption, but it gives precedent to what he's saying. Continue, Derek. I apologize.
And I want to say, I like that you sort of drew a parallel with the dungeons, right? Because you're sort of going through these steps, right? The mechanic has these multiple steps where you're getting this extra advantage in this case. So I like that as a parallel.
Yeah, it's not quite a dungeon,
No.
right? Because, like I said, because the state is compounding instead of changing.
Your cube, you said that you'd like. Did you bring this into one of your cubes already?
Yeah, I have a bunch of cards with ring tempting in it already.
Okay, so have you been able to play test this? And
yeah.
Give me. Let's hear some. I'd love to hear what either your feedback or even feedback that you've received from your players. What has been the overall experience like with this as a mechanic? And do you feel, this is a sub-game episode, but I'm definitely not. I'm no arbiter of what is or is not a sub-game. Have you felt that this has become kind of sub-gamey, or has it just felt like it's another mechanic that's part of the game and it's been, no problem, easy to track, a lot of fun?
I guess the question is, he's asking, does it feel organic?
It sounds like you don't really care for sub games as much as I do, based on
that's true.
The way you put that, right?
As we go through this list, I will cherry pick the ones that fit me best. That's true.
Yeah.
I am guilty of that.
I like this one. I will say I like this one.
But that doesn't matter. It's neither here nor there. Will I draft this? Yes. Will I play this? Yes. Will I be a curmudgeon and stop? No, I won't. This is neat. It's just, for me,
you won't put it in one of your cubes.
I have chosen not to. Some of these cards, as I've went through spoiler season, I'm like, that is a sweet card. And then it says the Ring Temps You. And I'm like, Sharpie? Maybe? I don't know.
But I want to hear, what's been the experience like? Like, how yourself or your players, what's been their feedback?
So, Call of the Ring is an interesting example to use because Call of the Ring, it wasn't in my first playtest, but I added it to my cube afterward. One of the things that Call of the Ring provides you is a repeated source of triggering the ring. And that is something that, like, most other cards, I think every other card I have in the cube is not repeatable except for Gallen, the 3/1 Gallen, like the uncommon one that I have, which you can, like, when it dies, the ring tempts you, and then you can bring it back from your graveyard to your hand by sacrificing a creature. So you can, in theory, like, over a couple turn cycles, continue to trigger. But, like, the Call of the Ring is the only one that, like, guarantees you the 4 triggers over 4 turns without any life payment and a very small mana investment. I feel I didn't, like, short sell myself on this, but I think, like, I definitely want this in the tests going forward. But, like, one thing that I think is really valuable about the ring is it creates makes creatures legendary, and that's something that, I've been playing around a lot with since Lord of the Rings came out. And making things legendary has all kinds of advantages in an environment like mine that gives you direct benefits from having legendary permanents in play. There are definitely cubes where you'd play Caracas and then it would not be that great. But I think it's not the Undercity, so it's not super powerful. It's not Venture, where it's kind of like you don't really care too much about picking one of the 3 dungeons. You generally just pick the middle one because it lets you draw a card very quickly. And then the ring, it exists somewhere in the middle. Like, it is valuable to advance specifically to the second one because you start being able to loot when you attack. So, like, getting a couple triggers is nice, is good. So incentivizes you to want to do it multiple times. And most importantly, I think, is it incentivizes attacking. And this is something that is, like, very important to the way I like to play Magic. I want it to be about creatures in combat, and the ring totally incentivizes you to attack. And I think that's
all of those
great.
abilities, they're all fair. There's nothing that's obnoxious or warping. All of them, like you say, looting is fine. Becoming legendary, that's fine. Blocking it, you have to sacrifice it. Okay, it's powerful, but it's not obnoxious. And dealing combat damage to a player, each opponent loses 3 life. Okay, that's pretty powerful, but that's required quite a bit of setup at this point. But it feels very fair to me. Anthony, I understand where you're come from because you're like you mentioned, you're not the huge fan of a lot of the sub games. But I actually think this is really well balanced. I think the mechanics are very cool. I don't think it's flavorful from a Lord of the Rings, The Ring perspective, but I think just from a straight up how it can persist in a Magic game, I actually think it's really cool.
I have a question though. It's a question for people who are going to add this to their cubes. Is there I'm sure someone on Etsy or the above has made an identifier so you know which creature has been targeted as the ring bearer, so that me as the opponent, it's so that I've got a board state of 7 creatures. Now I have to remember this creature now has these superpowers.
Sure. Well, the ring as a game piece tears in half. There's a perforated edge. You could tear off the top half where the character is holding the ring, and you could put it on the creature.
Okay, I was unaware of.
Yeah,
and
just want to let you know
they
thought of that. It's not like the best solution, but it is a solution for like a limited game. I have a ring. I wear rings, so I just took my ring off and gave it to the person who
That's kind of nifty. That's kind of nifty. Okay.
I love that.
I can get down with that.
I would have a ring made, or I would go to a pawn shop or something. But like, right, what do you got for like $30 that looks incredibly cheap and is gaudy? And that's kind of the look that I'd like.
Again,
to see
I may be the old man screaming at the clouds. Back in Lorwyn 5, whenever a Johnny Goldmane, Jace Bellerin, Liliana Vess, Chandra Nalaar, and Groot Wall speaking up, and they're like, "This is damaging magic." Rah, get off my lawn.
Hey, we're gonna get there. Don't worry.
I think for me, there's just been a lot of introduction of new mechanics that I realize it's a good thing. It's testing. They're testing game space, all that. It comes down to Magic is already complex. It's adding more complexity to probably, if not the hardest game in the world.
Well, this is kind of like you're summarizing. we've only done one sub game. I don't think we need to be summarizing this.
I'm not summarizing. And then some of these I'm going to like. But then it also comes down to density for me and the volume of it, just like any other mechanic. Once it becomes evergreen or they start introducing it in some form, then I will really grab onto it, or deciduous rather. But until then, it's like, I don't want to splash 1, 2, or 5 of these until then. That's just my curator stance. So
that's fair.
I've chosen to omit these until pioneers like you get out there in the wilderness and let me know if you got dysentery or not, and then I'll try it out after that.
that's fair. All right.
Okay.
I'm gonna move on.
Can I just add something really quickly?
Yeah,
of course.
Okay. So I mean, I hear you. I think that there are complexity issues with like individual cards, like text on cards and stuff. That's like definitely like something I've become very aware of recently, like over the last couple of years. For what it's worth, this is pretty clean, and it's very simple to follow. And like I said, it's not changing states; it compounds on itself. So it's you can kind of like read it almost like a saga that you're triggering. I like that the ring bearer is a target for removal and interaction. So that is kind of a downside. I will say for flavor freaks about Tolkien, you have to remember that they're creating a game out of these cards, and trying to tell somebody to play something that has a drawback in 2023, like a pure drawback, it's a pretty tough sell.
it is.
When there's so much being done to help Magic be about increasing the amount of game actions that you're allowed to take every turn.
Yeah, Magic is getting fast.
I think like that the flavor of that was focused on, it sounds like, and wasn't successful because it didn't create fun. And like I think ultimately that has to be the highest priority.
Yeah, I would agree. And I actually think we're going to move swiftly on because you just mentioned the point about creatures attacking. So this next sub-game, quote-unquote sub-game, I think fits perfectly on with that. And this is battles, sieges. So this is another new one. And I'm going to give like what I consider to be the poster child. And Anthony had a bit of a back and forth, or Anthony and I had a bit of a back and forth about this one. Anthony didn't seem to think it was quite up to par. Me personally, I think it's an incredibly powerful card. And this is the battle named Invasion of Alara. So it's a Wooburg battle. When it enters the battlefield, you exile cards from the top of your library until you exile 2 non-land cards with mana value 4 or less. You may cast one of these 2 cards without paying its mana cost, and then put one of them into your hand, and then put the other cards exiled this way on the bottom of your library in a random order. Anthony is not sold on this card. Personally, I think it's cool. But I also, again, going back to Derek, what you said, this is another mechanic that really heavily incentivizes, if you're playing them in your deck, right, or if you're including them in your cube, you're incentivizing attacking with creatures. Now, yes, of course, there's other ways to sort of get the value down. So for anyone who's not aware, these battles come in with a number of almost like loyalty counters, like you would a Planeswalker, and then once it comes down to 0, it flips and you get some kind of benefit, right? And the Invasion of Alara is basically, it's just this ridiculous ultimatum spell that just should be pretty game ending by itself. So I'm going to say that that's worthy of inclusion by itself. Incredibly fun card. Anthony's not impressed with Invasion of Alara. Is it because it requires too much setup? Is it because you just don't like it because it's not powerful or it's too subgamey? Or why else are you wrong about this card?
I'll do my
set that up right.
I'm gonna do my super fast 3 seconds about. I just don't like battles. I just don't like them in general.
That's fair.
I don't have anything really. That's it. I'm not here to drag them down. If you love them, you love them. Invasion of Alara. I'd rather hit you for 7 points. I'd like to shuffle up and play another game. I don't want to. They fit all of these aside from the front. This is my opinion, exclusive. I know they all do effects. I've read them. I've tried them. We've tried them in other cubes. Recently tried them in the Naya cube that Chris made. Every time I felt like, yeah, they're neat. I'm paying an overcosted thing to try to get. This is where I apologize, everybody, but they feel Winmore-ish and detracting from the game for me. These are the Cocobos or whatever. But that's it. I'm done. We're going to snip me right there. You guys have fun. You guys have a great conversation.
Not at all. I will say that one's probably not the greatest example because it's a very expensive. It's difficult, right? It's Wooburg, right? It's all 5 colors and it comes in pretty heavy. They're not all like that, right? Some of them are a couple of mana and they come in with like 4 counters or 5 counters. So not all of them are as difficult to cast and then as difficult to flip as Invasion of Alara is. I think that one particularly is probably, I would say it's more of a constructed card because you can build around it with something like Vampire Hexmage where you can remove all the counters from it. Whereas something like Invasion of Asgol, which is just a straight up black-red, enters the battlefield, target player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker and loses a life, right? For 2 mana, that's pretty good value. And then you've got the potential of a secondary effect as a result of that. So I don't know. Tell me what you guys think about it. And Derek, I'll go back to you. Like, how do you feel about? I'd sort of like to get your perspective on where these fall from a mana investment. Whether or not you think that there's some mana investment restriction that you would ideally want to place on cards like this inside a cube, right? Because again, 5 mana could be quite difficult. 2 mana, not so much. Where do you feel these fall in?
So, battles are subgames in similar to the way that planeswalkers are, right? Except that you're forcing your opponent to defend something, otherwise, like to defend something. Whereas like planeswalkers, you play it and you protect it.
Yeah.
So they're a lot more aggressive, which is I guess why they're like subtype siege. I think that's kind of the idea behind them.
Yeah.
So they create a game to me, a sub-game in that you have to weigh whether or not it's worth it to flip the battle. And yeah, sure, Hexmage cheats it, but that's kind of whatever. Like Invasion of Ikoria, being able to tutor up Vampire Hexmage is like a combo. I've played that, and it's fine, but like it's kind of like cheating the whole system that they're trying to set up. Sure. So I think like if to me the sub game is relevant if the back half is important, but also conversely, the more that life matters in your cube environment, the worse invasions are generally going to be, because taking time off to attack a battle is like gaining your opponent life. And so, like, yes, if you get to flip it over 2 turns or whatever, and you get to cast the backside, it's good, but the cost could be too great, and the risk can go up. And I've generally found in my playtesting of battles that most of them are, the overwhelming majority of them are not worth flipping. And a lot of the decks that do play them, or do play them to flip them, taking that turn off is always relevant. Like, I played a cube recently where somebody was playing Invasion of Gobekon, which I think is one of the best ones, which is a 2-mana white one with 3 counters on it, which is super pushed. And when it ETBs, you get to look at an opponent's hand, choose a non-land card from it, and exile it from it. And then they can have to pay 2 more to cast the spell from exile.
Okay.
And then when it flips, it turns into enchantment that says at the beginning of your end step, you put a +1/+1 counter on all creatures that attack this turn. And you get to sacrifice it to give all creatures you control indestructible till end of turn. So the whole thing is there. You get to protect, you get to make your creatures bigger, and then you get to protect them from a sweeper.
It's pretty aggro.
Like,
card.
it's
I
a
like it.
tight package. It's super pushed on rate.
Yeah.
And I was just always unimpressed by the card. And I know this is probably more my opinion on it, because I know other people really like it. But I generally don't. Cubes that are about life don't like to flip battles.
That's fair.
Cubes that are about like card advantage really care about flipping battles. Like, if your whole cube is about who can accumulate the most card advantage, battles are great because life totals don't matter. Eventually they matter, but like, that's not what the primary concern is.
Sure.
I have a question. I know I kind of poo-pooed on them in the beginning. There is a consideration for me. It's only because I just couldn't find a right fit. Like, either it's for thematic reasons, the art didn't reference something I was attempting to do. There's a lot of reasons, right? And I didn't want to, there's none of these that I could, like, I want to put in a generic, my powered 40 vintage cube, just because I'm trying to power max. But that's a whole different conversation. I was considering, and have been considering, putting battles for the flavor fun of it in my 2-headed giant, which really does try to embrace those big games of Magic. Everybody's having fun. Now, granted, there's 2 defenders at that point, right? So that really arcs that idea, but I thought it would be fun. They feel less in that idea when I'm doing squirrels and polymorphs, I'm doing some quote unquote nutty stuff. It feels like maybe I could take a little bit of time off and it'd be okay. You're at 30 life to do something fun. And I realize they're fun to flip them over and try to do a big thing, right? Try to do something that's interesting. So I was going to wait for the prices to come down, frankly, to kind of let them all level out and then just maybe consider injecting 10 of them or so, or maybe more, in my 2-headed giant environment just for the flavor fun aspect of it. Nothing more, nothing less than that. And it would be because I don't have like mechanical restrictions there. It just has to synergize with something. I'd have to evaluate them. What are your thoughts on a 2-headed giant type of environment, Derek? Do you think that's
cool?
That would be more fun.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that would be more interesting because then I'm not looking at like, because for example, the one that went to Innistrad, I evaluated it, and I don't recall what it does off the top of my head. And I have a Innistrad Universes Beyond, it's Uberbear's Horror Cube type. Like, so I looked at that one first, and there was nothing that did that was better than the black things, the black creatures that, you know, interestingly enough, I run 13 more black spells in that opposed to the other colors, Triskaidekaphobia. And I just wanted to, yeah, right. And I wanted to see if that card would fit. And I couldn't find a card that I'd want to cut to put that in more. Because again, even though I've got life gain and life matters, it just detracted from what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, and I think they do. For me, they exist on a bit more of an island than maybe some of the other sub-games do. I do agree that the Invasion of Asgol, you're getting a good effect from it, but then are you just playing that to get that effect, that ETB effect when it comes in, right? And if it does, then maybe there's some better options out there. Or maybe there isn't, and you just think, hey, I just want to add this because it's a fun mechanic and it gives the players something else to think about, some other kind of consideration.
That's my thoughts to kind of tie into what Derek said. The fronts on a lot of these do things, and they're interesting. it's the backs aren't really worth it, and they're kind of double-faced cards that really just draw a player in and make them pause the game. And I want the front and the back to be equally as interesting, right? If that makes sense. So I think it's great design space, and I hope it moves forward. I think it's interesting. I just haven't found a home. I will probably test once the prices come down in my Two-Headed Giant. I think that's a play space to test.
I think that is a great space for it. And Derek, I think the point that you made about the life totals and about how the more that life matters, I think that's such a phenomenal point to make about the battles, right? Because I don't want to say that you're just saying, hey, Invasion of Alara comes in, I'm giving my opponent 7 extra life. But if that's something that you're building around to try and get that secondary value off the flip when you do finally get it down past those 7 points, then you have basically given your opponent 7 life. And if you do, again, going back to Anthony, to what you said, if you've got the ability to be able to swing at your opponent and to take 7 damage off them, then, a lot of the time I'm pretty happy if I can do that in a turn or two, take 7 damage.
My Two-Headed Giant's all about big plays and laughter. So, I mean, if it does
there's a little bit of threat, evaluation that has to go on at some point with battles that's kind of interesting, which is, do I attack the battle or do I attack the player?
Absolutely.
And that creates a little bit of interest for me. But I actually, as much as I embrace, I'm very pro modern design. I did play with these cards quite a bit and tested a lot of them, and I cut every single one of them from my cube.
Interesting.
Okay. Well,
but
I'm going to move on to the next. Sure. I'm going to move on to the next one, and I'm going to let Anthony, or I would like to ask Anthony if he would like to introduce this one, because I know it's one of Anthony's all-time favorite sub-games in Magic the Gathering. Tell us about this one.
We're going to tear these into 2 pieces. It's going to be the initiative and the dungeons, but we're going to do round 1 will be the initiative, and there'll be some discussion on the initiative, which is dungeon 2.0, I guess, is what we'll call it. But the initiative, whenever one or more creatures a player controls deal combat damage to you, that player takes the initiative. Whenever you take the initiative, and at the beginning of your upkeep, venture into the dungeon city, aka another dungeon. If you are in a dungeon, advance to the next room. If you're not, enter the Undercity. You can take the initiative even if you already have it. Yeah, it's a game piece. It's neat. I find it strange, I guess, for flavor reasons, why they didn't just call this another dungeon mechanic. Was another sort. Am I wrong in making that statement? It was another pseudo dungeon-y type thing, but they gave it a new one. Which this D&D? Is this where they pulled this from? Dungeons, I guess, the Adventures, whatever.
So the first ones were in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, and then that was the Venture into the Dungeon, and then the initiative came about in Baldur's Gate.
Okay. Which is another variant, right? It's another variant of Dungeons and Dragons, correct? I don't play D&D, but I believe that to be true.
Yeah.
Close enough, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to kind of talk about these in more depth, but overarching, for various reasons, again, I'm the old man yelling at the clouds. I have not chosen to add any of these to any cube environment or commander, which we don't talk about very often.
Okay.
I will say that, and I'm going to go off the rails here with commander, and we're going to kind of come down to dungeons. Our good friend Christian he's an experimenter in commander. He loves to get the newest precon that comes out, and he'll crack them open, tear them open, he'll play them as is, right? And as we talked about commander, you've got the new pop and fresh commander that comes all the time with all these new things. You're sitting at the table, and I'm playing a deck that I have tuned. It is calibrated. It is ready to go. And then the meta changes within 5 minutes going, he's moving this little tiny Darth Vader miniature on the secondary board piece.
He is doing that.
Even. And this is a dungeon topic.
Well, let's be clear here. This was very specifically not an initiative. This was not an Undercity. This was the dungeon,
which we're going to talk about in a moment. But it matters. This is probably, if you want to understand where my feels come from, this is where my feels come from.
That's fair.
So then he goes and gets the big version of them. So he gives everybody a copy of the dungeon that now I can sit in front of my playmat and stare at these 3 giant secondary game pieces in front of me. And as he explains his little Darth Vader's moving around his left and choose your own adventure lefts and rights. So I am not a proponent of this mechanic just because it adds a whole nother tracking layer to my game designs. But it's not just that. It has to do with the fact that, too, that none of these, again, I'm a thematic cube designer.
Sure.
Outside of, again, my 540 and we'll say my two-headed giant, where I'll kind of let things come in. Most of these are horror genre.
Yeah, I think this
genre,
would fit in the horror.
I know,
but you don't like it, so I don't think. And I'm gonna actually make a point, right? I'm gonna put this out to the floor. I actually think, based just simply due to the fact that the Undercity just sits there, right, and you do get to make a choice as to which room you go to next. I actually think this is really less subgamey than the others because I don't think it's super difficult for yourself or your opponent to kind of keep track of it. It's not like there's 50 choices, at the beginning of your upkeep, like you say, or when you venture in, you get to make that choice. I don't think this is overly complex, or I don't think it's overly impactful on the game outside of other organic aspects of Magic, where to me this would be a problem. The other dungeons, and I will agree with the whole EDH aspect, because Christian had basically a lineup of these things over his playmat, and that became way more difficult to track. And obviously in an EDH game, you're playing with 4 players, so you've got a whole bunch of stuff to keep track of. But if it's in a cube environment and it's 1v1 and it's just this one Undercity dungeon, to me, I don't have any problem with that. And I like the fact that you've now had to either, cast one of these creatures and or maybe even attack and get it back, similar as you would with a later sub-game that we'll talk about. But I don't dislike it. I actually think it creates fun interactions between 2 players that have got creatures. Derek, I know you've already mentioned about creature stuff. I don't know if that kind of aligns with how you feel, because you to me you like the fact that players have got creatures out there and you want players to attack and for creatures to be part of the game.
Well, they are part of the game.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%.
There's more steps in combat than there are any other part of Magic's turn cycle.
Yep.
So I don't know. Anyway, that's something else. So I disagree that it's less busy or not as subgamey, because the initiative becomes relevant for both players, much like the Monarch does, and whereas Venture and the Ringed are not. They are for one person. And so initiative is the Undercity is forced upon the opponent, unless obviously they're not trying to take it back because they don't have creatures or whatever. They're playing a combo deck of some kind, but the initiative is like a piece that you bring to the table, and you also have to bring one for your opponent. So there's already a kind of a forced agreement into the sub game for the other person, which is one of the reasons I think the initiative did not resonate with people. Yes, it was also extremely powerful, but it also was kind of forced on people, so they had to learn all of the rooms and they had to learn the whole thing. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I think it's fine, and I think that stuff I think it's fun to play with new things, like I've said. So if it's good, you probably would do well to learn and experiment with it. But I think a lot of people were turned off by that they had to engage with it. I think that reason it was a reason why I think a lot of people were turned off to it. Also, and I'm going to say this with Venture into the Dungeon too, it feels like a mechanic that was made for a digital world and not for a analog world. There's a lot of affordances that come with all of this tracking of venturing through a dungeon. On Magic Online or Arena, it's very easy and it's very intuitive. It handholds you through the whole thing, almost like you're playing with a saga. I'm going to reference sagas a lot because I think they are the masterful design of something like this, which is the initiative feels to me like an experimental outcropping of both sagas and Venture and Monarch all at the same time. You have Monarch that passes it back and forth, so it's relevant for both players.
Yeah. You
have Venture, so you have rooms. And then you have sagas, and that you're going through and changing states. I tested it once, and I was and the first draft I did, one of my players had Brutal Cathar, Palace Jailer, and White Plume Adventurer on the battlefield at the same time.
That's a lot of tracking. That's a lot of tracking.
And he is a extremely competent player. He's played on the Pro Tour. He's one of the better players I know, and he's a game designer by trade. And he lost his mind because he became overwhelmingly frustrated by having to keep track of all those things and having to force two of them onto his opponent, which slowed the game down even further. So from a paper standpoint, I don't like the initiative. I don't like how much it takes to make it work. And I don't like that it forces your opponent to engage with it. From an online perspective, I do think it works a lot better. I do think it's very good in a format like Pauper because it brings games to a close a lot faster if they were otherwise not going to. I like mechanics that bring the game to an end state. I think that's healthy because it incentivizes progression, incentivizes action, which is what I really like about Modern Magic. But it was too complicated to put for my main cube along with the other things I had. I also play a lot of lands that are non-basic, so fetching basics didn't really feel right to me. But that's like a quirk of my own particular cube. So yeah, I hope I said enough about it. It's a complicated topic from both construction and cube standpoint.
No, I agree. I think it is. I like the mechanic. I've always, and maybe this is because maybe my opinion of the other dungeons was a little soured, and this one always felt a little nicer to me. So maybe I'm a little sort of rose tinted glasses with initiative more.
Well, it's way more powerful than the other three.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's very, very, very strong. I mean, obviously, White Plume Adventurer, which I'm going to quickly go over as kind of the poster child for this, which was banned in Legacy. White Plume Adventurer, 2 colorless, 1 white for an Orc Cleric. When it enters the battlefield, you take the initiative. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, untap a creature you control. If you've completed a dungeon, untap all creatures you control instead. And it comes in as a 3/3 for a 3. So, like you say, this was a pretty format warping card for Legacy. Very, very powerful, given that you take that initiative immediately. And yeah, I do think that it is a sub game. You know, you're immediately thinking, how can I, take the initiative back from my opponent, or how can I defend my own initiative? That kind of stuff. I like I said, I don't dislike it. Maybe I've been a little rose tinted with it because the other dungeons are maybe a little fell foul to me through the format, which will not be named. But yeah, I'm interested to see. Anthony doesn't have this in any of his cubes. I don't know if anyone's going to bring cubes with initiative in, or battles, or any of the previous or future mentioned sub game mechanics when we go to CubeCon. I hope they do.
I believe the Live the Dream has a lot of these because I saw it whenever we were playing with McDarby.
Well, David McDarby's Live the Dream cube is like
it's absolutely gorgeous.
Is one of my fun time cubes. I love that cube.
All right, so we've got another kind of a classic. And I want to find out, this is an audience participation thing, right? As we label things sub-games, to reiterate, the term sub-game, it means something to us as individuals. I want to talk about that. Like, as you noticed, all three of us had different opinions about what we consider, interactive sub-game or a natural organic game piece that happens, right? And it's how we track them, whether or not there's secondary, tertiary pieces, other board tracking, middle tasking that you have to keep on the board so that the players understand who's tracking it. As Derek said, in one instance, it's me as the individual. I'm responsible basically for my good housekeeping. But what about that instance when I invite, my friend over to play Magic with me, and now they must also track that component as well too, and how they feel about it. So that is part of the scales being weighed as to whether or not you're deciding to add a quote unquote, air quotes, I'm doing them, can everybody see it, sub-game to your Magic Gathering experience, right?
So let's talk about this next one. This to me seems like one of the most polarizing. Is it maybe the most polarizing as far as what's liked and what's disliked?
So. I do believe so.
I would say.
Yeah.
Derek?
We all have personal reasons for this.
You want to bring this one in and tell us what you think about it?
I've never looked at this and thought it was super polarizing. That's
Well, let me explain. Let me lead it off, and I'll give you my polarization story because it does matter. So we're going to talk about toxic, infect, and poison. We're going to put them all in the same. But let's lead it off with the OG, right? In 1994 Legends, the first card to introduce this was Pit Scorpion, and it saw some very, like 7 cards were printed during that time. And then we roll around to Scars of Mirrodin in 2010. I believe I'm accurate, somewhere around Mirrodin. And suddenly we went from 7 to just like this bevy of poison, infect, and all this stuff started coming in. It's really neat, right? But it created some tension amongst playstyles. At the time, not necessarily cube involved, but in their versions of standard or their normal rotations. And I'm going to read the Oracle text for this card. It's just cute. This is a fantastic, it's by Ian Miller. This art is gorgeous. It's scary. You don't want to hold it in your hand, right? Pit Scorpion. For 2 colorless and 1 swamp, you get a creature, Scorpion. Whenever Pit Scorpion deals damage to a player, that player gets a poison counter. Here's the part I'm going to read. A player with 10 or more poison counters loses the game. Okay, here's the story. All right. So, started playing Commander, right? And I wanted to build, and we don't talk about Commander.
We're talking about Commander a lot
but it
today.
does. This matters.
I don't know if I like this.
This is how we got our friends.
I don't know if you know this, but all conversations about Magic are actually about Commander.
They are, but this is how we got our friend circle. We're all cubers now, right? We got people that are like, oh god, we're gonna cube. But it used to be like, let's get together and play Commander, right? So I built Skeleton Ship. That was the first one I did, a proliferation skeleton ship. And I introduced them like, I'm going to do poison counters. And that's going to be really cool because we're not used to this at this point. This is like 10, 12 years ago. And we started playing with our good friends, getting together in our group. I was going to build something. It was a nice little Dimir poison deck. Well, it says 10 counters, right? 10 poison counters is what it says on the card.
It does.
From 1994.
Yes.
Well, you can't do that. You got to do 15.
Says who?
My group. Do you know how hard it was to get 15 poison counters even with? I was on the struggle. I'm like, I'm going to proliferate. And they're like, I get you to 14. I'm still alive. I'm like, you've been dead for 4 poison counters and you're still here. And they're like, nope, it's 15. Play group. We've called it.
This kind of backs up my argument about this being polarizing, right?
And now we've moved, we fast forwarded, right? So now Toxic has come out and all these things, which we're going to talk about here momentarily, and all these new precons that have these abilities in there. And they release them. And now we start playing it, and they go, you got 10 poison counters, you're dead. And I go, what? It's 15. You guys called it like 12 years ago. No, it's 10. It says it right here. I'm like, it says that in 1994.
I will say I've seen commentary on the socials, on social media, where it's just literally been straight up banned, where people have said like, we don't consider infects. If you hit someone with an infect player, they just take damage. We don't consider it. Or similar to the scenario that you just discussed, right, where they've said no, we only give an infect win if it's 20 poison counters or something like that. So I'm telling you right now, I do honestly think infect it is very, very polarizing. Some people love it; they think it's a legit mechanic, and it's part of Magic. And some people really, really, really hate the fact that you only have to deal 10 poison counters to take someone out of the game.
I like it.
Yeah, but that's the way the mechanic works. I don't understand why.
But it's Cheaty McCheetah-face.
It's not Cheaty McCheetah-face.
I agree. I agree with you. I don't think it is. But that's not our opinion, but it is the opinion. Like, some people are of that opinion that like you're cheating this win by only having to deal 10 poison damage. This is something that, for me, I see infect, I'm immediately interested in it, right? It's a cool mechanic. I like the fact that you only have to deal 10 damage. It's a little more difficult to build around than just a straight up, typical aggro deck. But again, it is a little subgamey because now you're not just dealing with a life total. Now you're dealing with a poison counter total as well. What do you think about it? Like, for me, I love it. I think it's an amazing mechanic, and I love seeing it. I mean, I don't know how you guys have it in your
cube. I thought it was fun. I enjoyed it. I thought it was neat and nice. I actually don't run any of these in my cubes, but I certainly have considered it. I guess skill rivs. Have I said that right? Somebody correct me if I'm saying that wrong.
Skittles.
Not Skittles. The
Skrells.
Skrell. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's a really neat card. Skrell's Defector Might. It was on my short list for my artifact cube. I'll read that to you. It's 1 plains, legendary artifact creature, Phyrexian Might. Toxic 1, players deal combat damage by this creature. Also get a poison counter. Skill Riv. defector might. Sorry, these words are getting a
Skrelv.
They're a little hard. Skrelv?
Skrelv.
I'm having a hard time with that. Sorry. Can't block. And then you can pay Phyrexian, which I think is neat. I like Phyrexian mana very much. Tap, choose a color. Another target creature you control gains Toxic 1 and Hexproof from that color until the end of the turn. It can't be blocked by creatures of that color this turn. I think this is a neat card. I have chose to admit it because of the Hexproof portion, because it had that kind of, felt like mom to me, I guess.
Sure.
Mother of Runes or whatever. I didn't want to run that. But I think it's neat, and it's also, I just didn't support enough of it to push it over that line. But I have considered maybe, and this is, I want your feelings on this, experimenting this with my 2-headed giant cube. How does that work, by the way?
10.
It's still 10, right? Even
Should
though
be
your
10.
shared life total.
It should be 10.
Because I run proliferation and all that stuff, but I'm wanting to know if I can actually, push
I would
that.
say it should be 10.
I think it's neat. I don't.
I think it should be 100, actually.
We're going to keep it at 10.
What are your feelings on? Are you a fan of the idea of infect or dislike, Derek? What are your thoughts?
As a cube minigame, I think it's pretty hard to pull off because you need such critical mass. I think that now that Proliferate has gotten stronger, there's more space that's opened up for like poison kills, which I think is like kind of cool. I think Carmen Handy's Proliferate cube has poison in it, which would make a lot of sense. I'd have to like look at the list, but I'm pretty sure it does. If not, that's like a space where you can explore that stuff. I think it's a cool mini game. I think it's like really fun to like threaten somebody with like a different like life total basically.
Yeah, it's another
and I think like Toxic is a really, really, really clever balancing knob. Like just from a design standpoint, Toxic and Corrupted and Poison Deaths are really, really clever ways to execute like card designs, because like you have a threshold mechanic basically that's implemented as poison counters, almost like you're giving someone a status ailment. And I think that that's pretty resonant when you're talking about like poisoning somebody. Corrupted is when you get 3 or more poison counters. There are cards from All Will Be One that care about you having that threshold of poison counters. It makes the card more powerful or the effect better. So I think like Toxic is a really good implementation because damage still matters. So you're not like your opponent isn't at 30 at the beginning of the game. Like you can deal regular damage and poison damage, which is really, really cool. I don't like, infect and then like a Howl from Beyond effect, just like one-shotting somebody. I don't think that's like really fun. That's just like casting hatred on your creature. And like, so that's like a little too extreme, a little too intense for me. I've never played a cube that has infect or toxic or whatever. I would like to at some point. I run
Blightsteel Colossus in my powered 540 for cheating it out and wrapping the game. How do you
Blightsteel just says if I hit you, you probably lose the game.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. That's what I was going to ask you. I think you answered my question. I was going to ask you, how do you feel about that?
It's fine. It's just a big dumb thing that kills you.
It is.
It's no different than a lot of other things in similar space. Usually takes 2 hits or 1 hit. So, it makes the game all about it, which like, for better or for worse, that's what the card does.
Yeah. I think in a vintage cube where, if you can cheat it out and swing with it, good luck to you. There's plenty of broken things to do in a vintage cube environment where you can win very quickly and cheat things out. It is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, you have Solitude now, so.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why no one, it's just there's more exile effects. So I don't know.
We kind of breezed upon it. It's in the show notes. You can reference it. We kind of talked about the dungeons and the venture in the dungeon mechanic, and I have some cards that I've highlighted in there. And for the sake of time, I'll skip past it. But the Dungeon of the Mad Mage, the Lost Mine of Fandlever, and then Tomb of Annihilation are kind of the tracks that you can follow on that path. They're included in there. I did experiment them, and funny, I actually added them in my Cube Cobra, started slotting them into my Horror Cube because I thought I could kind of make them thematic, and then I never actually gave them a go, never gave them a play test. Maybe at some point, but, after CubeCon, but I had considered them. I had my feelings about how I've seen them played. They do a lot of interesting things. It's just the additional game piece tracking of me explaining to Derek as my opponent that I'm in the Goblin Bazaar right now, and it creates a treasure token. I mean, it's whether or not that opponent wants to participate in that, I guess, is the end game here, right?
Yeah. And again,
What,
maybe
with dungeons?
Yeah,
like
dungeons.
venture into the dungeon?
Yeah. It doesn't impact you. It's just whether or not whether or not I think that brings, I haven't decided. At some point, maybe I'll decide if we get enough of these. And again, my two-headed giant is the perfect environment for introducing these subgames, right? Something that I can experiment with, something I can try, because it's just meant to be a fun, experimental type of game. And I'm okay with putting pieces into that environment and then taking them back out. And because now I've got, what happens in that environment, interesting enough, is I've got 3 other players live action reviewing my choices. My feedback is like spontaneous. It's not just about Derek's, how it may have impacted his play experience, but also I can get Stu and Christian, who are sitting there too, and they can give me immediate feedback on whether or not I can, that card should be included or carried forward.
Yeah.
You know if it's fun for them, and that's really valuable.
I get fast info in there, so it's a good playground for me in so many words, right?
Yeah.
Sandbox.
So let's talk about, this was what started it all for me. Again, going all the way back to that very, very cool discussion in Derek's Cube resleeving stream. And
what did I say? What did I say again?
I said, I'm not a huge fan of subgames. And you said, what? You don't like Monarchy? Those are your words. And I will say, I was thinking more, this was about a year ago. So you can think about the other sort of subgamey effects that have happened in the last year. To me, I wasn't thinking as much about Monarch being a subgame. And it really made me expand to my own sort of understanding of how biased I was, right? And I'm very open with my feelings and my own stupidity about my opinions. And I felt that I was really restricting my own thought processes when it came to stuff like this. And I just really had such an insulated view of subgames and really about Magic in general. Because I thought I kind of understood how it should be played. Maybe that was just being incredibly egotistical. And then when I started to really expand on how other people would feel about particular board states and particular mechanics and so on and so forth, it really started to sort of, it was another sort of step in my maturation as far as how I viewed Magic. And yeah, absolutely. I think, you said it, Monarchy is a subgame.
Yeah. It's one of the most resonant and kind of brutal subgames that they've ever made, I think.
Brutal
I think
is a great word for it. I love
it's
that.
brutal because it's so straightforward. It's almost elegant in a way, because it reads simply. It feels right. Like when you read the cards, it's like, yeah, I become the monarch, get to draw extra cards, like that's powerful. And then the gameplay for me, and I had some recent feedback on this too, because I put some new cards from Lord of the Rings with Monarch in it, which is games with Monarch pieces, specifically at the level of like Palace Jailer, Fall from Favor, they tend to become entirely about who has the Monarch, because that raw card advantage is so strong that the game can and usually does devolve into whoever can hold on to the Monarch is just going to win the game on raw cards. There are obviously places where that isn't true, but like ETB, become the Monarch, exile your opponent's creature is like, or like remove your opponent's creature, generally going to let you keep the Monarch.
Yeah, if Palace Jailer didn't have Monarchy, it would be strong, right? But the fact that you get, I'm going to put a body on board, and I'm going to exile a creature, and I'm going to draw an extra card at the end of turn, and you have to deal with this. Like now, you can't allow me to just persistently have this advantage, or I'm going to win.
For the purposes of the audience, I'm going to add Palace Jailer for 2 colorless and 2 planes. You get a creature, human soldier, 2/2. Whenever Palace Jailer enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. When Palace Jailer enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls until an opponent becomes the monarch. That's the arms race that Derek's alluding to, that now becomes, if you want to get said creature back, you have to do work for it.
I think this is a really good discussion point, Monarch, the original design of it, and the negative feedback that I heard about it and the negative gameplay experiences, and like what that stems from and what it changes about the game, and like what people might not like about it, but why it's important in like a modern design context, because I think the Monarch is like a really interesting thing to talk about. So for a long time, Magic was, especially in the 90s. Yes, I'm old enough that I played most Magic for most of the 90s. A lot of Magic cards, powerful ones, were cards that incentivized inaction and tried to reduce the choices that your opponent had in the game. And what the Monarch, the game grew and grew, it let go of that. Like, we didn't just play stasis and back to basics and strip mine and all that kind of stuff. Those are extreme examples, but they prove the point. Winter Orb. Now we have this thing, the Palace Jailer, that says, we're going to play a game where I'm going to make you be proactive. Otherwise, you're going to lose. I'm going to make you attack. I'm going to make you engage in combat and try to steal it back.
Potentially unfavorably.
And like, yes, I'm using Cube and 1v1 Magic as an example. It was not designed for 1v1 Magic. It was designed for Commander. And also, for Commander, it incentivized people attacking each other and trying to bring the game to a conclusion, which is really great for a 4-player game. When there's a big incentive to play games of Commander where people are just kind of like doing things independently of each other. Like, the Monarch says no. The Monarch says we have to do something. Otherwise, you're going to let somebody snowball away with cards or whatever. And that is a really significant design innovation, I think. And the effect it had on 1v1 Magic is obviously profound. I mean, Palace Jailer is an extremely powerful Magic card. And, it's caused a lot of concerns. It's caused a lot of concerns because I think there are a lot of people that want to play Magic where they don't do anything. And there's also a lot of people that want to play Magic where they don't want to toss this thing back and forth. And I understand both of those things, but I think it's a net positive, even if I generally hear negative things about the gameplay. It's kind of a confusing thing to feel. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So I like it a lot, and you heard you say something earlier when we were in the beginning of the episode about Monarch and Pauper, and I'll come to that in a moment. But I kind of want to explain my Pauper design experience with Chris Moore, aka Sandwich, and our experience with Monarch in Pauper Cube environments. And it's, in particular, the card Fall from Favor. For 2 colorless and 1 blue, get an enchantment aura. Enchanted creature, when Fall from the Favor enters the battlefield, tap Enchanted creature, you become the Monarch. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step unless that player's a Monarch. Now, that is a creature-dense environment on both accounts, right? I made a 360, and I believe his is a 450, and they're pretty tuned. I gave mine away to my little brother, but all the same, Monarch warped those environments heavily, as in that card advantage overtook the creature environment, just because it gave that, as Derek has stated, it gave card draw advantage just for even defending. Even if you didn't take a game action, you would just draw enough answers until you solved the equation in a Pauper environment. And the biggest offender, because we kind of did this in waves, so we cropped them out. The biggest offenders, and I don't have the name, was definitely Fall from Favor, because blue card draw was more of what blue is already doing in a Pauper environment. The other one that was actually an offender was the colorless version of the common card that gave you Monarch. I can't recall it right now, but it was an interesting card. And I, during my little brother's, we'll call it the lamest bachelor, coolest bachelor party in the world before he was getting married on the day of, we went to an LGS, and I said, let's go play some Magic. Let's relax you a little bit. And I said, let's go draft this Pauper Cube we just made. So I invited people over to the table, and I drafted Factional Monarch. Everything, I just kept seeing it coming on the table. They were passing it to me like, I'm Monarch, Monarch, Monarch. I guaranteed the whole Pauper experience, I would be the Monarch. The minute they took it from me, I'd play another card that says, I am the Monarch. It made it impossible. I had so much card draw advantage, and Fall from Favor was the engine that I needed in a pauper cube environment to just dominate that draft. And that's not the best experiment in the world, but I'm not we immediately cut Monarch from our pauper environments as a result of that experience.
I can imagine any environment where drawing cards is either difficult or very powerful, which I suppose kind of covers everything. But something like that where the card draw can be overwhelming, it's just going to get out of control.
So think about this. Perhaps this is a way to paint why it can be a negative experience. I cast Fall from Favor, and I become the Monarch, and I draw a card, and I pass it to you. And you go, okay, all right. All I have to do is just steal it back. But they remove my guy, so I have to draw a card. Oh, that card didn't really help. I mean, maybe it was a land, maybe it was something, maybe it was a creature. I'll play my creature, and I'll pass. Well, then they go, okay, well, I'll draw 2 cards and play a land and a creature and something else, or land and a creature and say go. And it's like, oh, well, now you're like, all right, I just have 1 card a turn to try to fight back against 2 cards a turn. But this is supposed to be about passing the Monarch back and forth between us. But it doesn't really matter because because you have twice as many resources as I do now. How am I supposed to possibly steal back the Monarch unless I was already in place to steal it back already? So I feel deflated and I can't really steal it back. And the game just kind of devolves and becomes about just card advantage. And
I agree.
Those are deflating experiences.
You said in a multiplayer experience, it has a home because it encourages combat. It gets games moving along. Stagnation is broken up just because people do things that maybe they wouldn't have normally done. They're kind of pseudo-goaded, right, to go attack Derek because he has the Monarch. And I'm going to go get that because I want some cards just because I want to progress my game state. But in a 1v1, it does give a really strong advantage. I would say the Monarch is the most, as you said, elegant of all of these sub-games.
It only requires 1 piece to keep track of it.
It's not really difficult.
That's it. That's all you need.
It's not very difficult.
And it's 1 line.
1 line.
Or
1 word.
2 lines or whatever.
You could pass
it's
a hat
very
around.
clean.
You could wear a Burger King hat and literally say, I'm the Monarch. It's pretty, and that's what we should do, right, Derek? But it would be pretty dope. And I like it. I just think that it has to be, context matters. Your environment has to be able to handle that type of card draw advantage. If the power level that you have can handle it, then rock on with your bad self. But in my opinion, if your pauper cube environment is loaded full of Monarch, and you're enjoying it, go ahead. But it does create, you will have times where one person is going to run away on sheer card draw advantage, even outside of their color.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, so we've mentioned, not in this episode, but we've talked about cards that can kind of scale within the environment, right? I think we had a discussion about Force of Will one time, and where, Force of Will is an incredibly powerful piece of counter magic, right? But obviously it requires you to pitch a card from your hand and pay a life, which it's only 1 life, but you do, it is a 2 for 1 basically. And we made the point, can cards like that scale? Monarch doesn't scale. There is no time that Monarch doesn't scale. It's just absolutely busted, regardless of what the power level is, because Magic is ultimately a game of attrition, and anytime your resources are doubled versus your one opponent, you're going to have to try pretty hard to lose, or you're going to have to draw 10 lands in a row in order to not take advantage of it.
And the original designs of Monarch, a lot of it was ETB, which is, if it's remove a creature and get it, or just ETB get it, you're just kind of getting it for free a lot of the time. So one of the things I think they did really well with the Lord of the Rings ones, Fourth Aerlingus is a brand new card that's seeing a ton of constructed play in Legacy, and it is extremely powerful in Cube. It's red, white, X, sorcery, create X, 2/2 red human knight creature tokens with trample and haste. So if you want a basic comparison for a Cube card that a lot of people are familiar with, there's a card called Heroic Reinforcements that a lot of people played for a long time as a Boros card, which is 2 red, white, make 2/1/1 sorcery, make 2/1/1s. All creatures that you control get +1/+1 and haste. So that's essentially kind of what you're getting when you cast Fourth Aerlingus for 2, right? You pay 2 red, white, you get 2 2/2s with haste and trample. No, but it has a Monarch clause to it. But it's different. It says whenever one or more creatures you control deal damage to one or more players this turn, you become the Monarch.
I like it a lot.
Ostensibly, it's I need to make enough creatures to get the Monarch. But also, but like you don't just get it right away. You have to like sink enough mana into this to make sure that happens. There's also points where you could cast this just to block, and then you don't get the Monarch at all. So there's a bit of balance going on there that I think is really good. However, I think the card is just still very, very, very powerful, and I haven't gotten mine in the mail yet, so I'm really scared about how powerful this card is. But I think tweaking Monarch is a really good way to advance the mechanic.
When I was drafting this episode and I was pulling up these cards, I'm like, oh man, I forgot that card. That card is dope. And I was going to ask you if you were going to order it, because I want to put this, I actually want to test this out in a 540 powered vintage. I think it's bringing combat back to the game that I want to see. I like it.
It's the best Boros card.
Yeah. Well,
you heard it here first.
I don't know if a Johnny agrees with you. I really like my Lightning Helix, but sure.
Like from like
I agree. It's really amazing.
Just how strong the card is.
Yeah.
I think it's the best Boros card.
Card advantage in red-white? What?
It's pretty good.
Great.
What?
Hey, Showdown of the Skulls exists, by the way.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm a huge fan of this, actually. I added it to the list. I'm happy to see it. And I think I'm going to order one to test it out. I'm a fan.
To me, there is one more that should be brought up in my own estimation.
Okay.
Because I think it's a really crucial sub-game conversation card.
Okay. All right, go ahead and do it.
If you just want to, I think Planeswalkers are a really good example of this.
Oh my gosh, we hadn't even got to that. Yes, Derek, you're 100% correct. Planeswalkers. What makes them sub-gamey for you?
So they were new game object when they were designed. They are something that can be. They're a very interactive piece that provides you an advantage over time. That you can like I said, they're interactive. You can attack them. You can use removal spells on them, but they left unchecked, they snowball and they run away with the game. So like the game can often come down to Planeswalkers staying on the battlefield. They do present a bit of like complexity that's obviously very healthy because they've been around for a long time. They are one of the best, another really great example, in my opinion, of a new type of card that incentivizes action because they march towards an ultimate, and the ultimates can end the game, especially some of the earlier ones that were like straight up end the game versus like now it's like not end the game but get an advantage, or like the middle design era, which was end the game slowly but eventually. Yeah, Planeswalkers are one of my favorite card types. Everything about them like works to me towards modern Magic principles. They, of course, have made ones that do incentivize inaction. Teferi Hero of Dominaria is a really good example because it literally ends the game by itself because it can tuck itself into its library, so you can never get decked, and you can just deck the opponent. And its ultimate allows you to exile all your opponent's permanents. So it's just the end state is your opponent has no permanents, no cards in hand, and no library.
And you've been drawing cards the whole time as well, which it's
a horrible play experience, I think. But like, I think when Planeswalkers are good, in my opinion, like good Planeswalker designs, like encourage action and move the game state forward. So I'm a huge fan of them. I don't know how you guys feel. But
I am a huge fan of Planeswalkers. I will say, I think they're the one card type that, of all the things that we've talked about, maybe with the exception of the Monarchy, is the one card type that is the most dangerous to put in a cube that's like a thematic cube, because they are or can be so incredibly warping if they are a power outlier, which in the experiences that I can say I've had, and I know Anthony's waiting to tell me about his as well. Trust me, he's there with his like, he's got his hand up in agreement that they can be so game warping. especially if they're kind of forced in because, hey, I'm putting together either some kind of theme or a color, and it's like, hey, this card is within that theme or within that color, so I'm going to put it in there. And suddenly it's like, if you see that card, you're taking it, pick one, pack one, no doubt. And if it lands, it can warp the game. That to me, certainly I love them, but they're the one card type I think that, outside of some of the obvious ones like Monarchy, that I think you need to be most cautious with.
I've defined them as active fogs on numerous occasions, as in they draw the attention of the players, right? I mean, it's either you can choose to go around the river, but you may be making a poor decision by doing so. You may lose the game by your choice to not attack the Planeswalker.
Oko is my greatest EDH fog card. I don't play fog, but I do play Oko in Commander, and when I do, nothing gets attacked except for Oko. That's basically what he does.
It's based on infamy a lot of times.
Sure.
But so from a thematic design build, I can list off my cubes that have them in there intentionally. It would be obviously my powered 540 vintage, just because, and I splash them. I think I run like 30 of them in there, somewhere around that. Oh, wow. 540. It's quite a bit of density. But then I run them in my horror cube, but I choose which ones, like Liliana the Veil, Liliana the Last Hope, etc. And I think Sorin. Got a couple of cards, but they're also very thematic as to what they do, and they drive the archetypes. They're signposts for the different archetypes I'm trying to signal. But like in my Uber Bears artifact cube, I don't run any Planeswalkers, and it's not because I don't love them. I think they're fantastic. It's unfortunately the suite of Planeswalkers that are available to me that would be on that would resonate thematically are just too damn strong.
You don't want to put Dak Faden in your artifact cube?
No.
Please?
No.
Just once? Just
no,
for one?
I mean,
what about Koth?
No, exactly. Or Duretti or Tezzeret.
Yeah,
these are fantastic. No? These are just looking for a home, and if you found the perfect place, it would be my artifact cube. And the worst place, because my feedback would be the coverage at CubeCon 2023 would be a whole nother conversation.
It'd be a bunch of ripped up Planeswalkers.
It would be, because they would do so much work because they're just so efficient at what they do. And the other problem that I have is, like you just named them, in that environment, they're red, they're blue, and I think Nissa is green that interacts with artifacts in some form or fashion. And then I get into other colors that don't really do a whole lot with them outside of like Nahiri or whatever. You see, the problem that I run into is I run into cards that just don't have that level of interaction. It's just sometimes in that in particular environment, it's in the artifact cube, is the ones, my choices, the suite that I have before me, they're just too good. They would warp the environment, and they would take away player agency during the draft. There's no reason why anybody would ever pass a Duretti Scrap Welder or some form of Tezzeret to take some janky, or in my version of jank, they wouldn't take it unless they just want to,
play jank.
They're seeking to find the fun to the finest, right? Otherwise, those cards would just take away the choices during the draft by being the best cards in the pool. So Planeswalkers, I love them. I do. I just don't think they're right for every environment. That's my personal opinion. You have to be very select with that. They don't scale to certain environments. I mean, they just, that's kind of it in so many.
I think if your cube has a hard time establishing a board presence and you can't pressure a Planeswalker, then Planeswalkers can dominate an environment. I've played a lot of cubes. I think old Magic Online cubes are pretty emblematic of that gameplay experience, where like you could just play a bunch of Planeswalkers and some removal spells and you just feel like God. And like, and then when I started playing cubes that were good at getting on the board and establishing card advantage and mana advantage by playing cards more quickly and, making your creatures being able to draw cards and whatever, like then I turned Jace into a 4-mana brainstorm. And like, that feels really good. It feels good when you can make a Planeswalker. Planeswalkers are always going to be powerful because that's the nature of the card type, I think, because they're so marketable for the company. But like, you do have to be conscientious of what their role is in the cube. It's not just fun to play a bunch of Planeswalkers for most people, because if there's nothing to contest them, then it's just kind of like, then it's just about cards. Like, it's all it's about is just generating card advantage.
For me, I would say the Planeswalkers, I agree 100%. They're very powerful. But how long can they be powerful for? And like you mentioned, if you can't establish the board presence and they can be powerful for 3 turns and 4 turns or whatever, then it's just an immediate, like, okay, this is likely going to be warping. If they're only potentially could be powerful for a turn or two because your opponent is likely to have the board presence or the cards or whatever to deal with them, then maybe they're less problematic. But again, going back to some of the other thematic cubes that you've talked about, there's just not a way to deal with them quickly enough for them to be like, not just an instant first pick in a draft.
There's a dichotomy that I was presented with recently that I think about a lot lately. And I think maybe it's Planeswalkers give me a little bit of a taste into like how you can think about this, which is and the reason I keep bringing up the cube is about card advantage is because the thing that was presented to me is your cube about cards or about mana? And I'm not saying that's a fundamental thing you have to answer, but it's a framework you can use to evaluate what's going on and what the primary like form of engagement that your decks are playing on. Are all of your decks fighting for cards? That's kind of like a Planeswalker cube because everyone's trying to generate card advantage through Planeswalkers. It's not only that, but that's like a good example of that. Sure. Is your cube about mana? Where like being able to generate and use your mana faster and more efficiently than your opponent, is that the thing that's going to get you advantage? Is untapping and attacking with creatures generating mana? Is it generating cards? Is it about the board or is it about the hand and what's going on with how many resources you have? There's a balancing knob there. It's not one or the other, but like there is a dominant force that you could look at. And overly dominant, in my opinion, Planeswalker environments, like when they feel very strong, a lot of the times either the cube is slow, so cards matter more, or that the cube is trying to incentivize just who can generate more value and draw more cards. One of them is not better than the other, but that could be a way that you can think about how you use your Planeswalkers. And what
back to the active fog conversation that I've really latched onto, J-Bro made a point that your life, because they detract from the attack, kind of like battles do.
Right? Exactly.
So you divert your attack to another. So you're giving card draw advantage by not taking away from life total, because you're essentially, and he had a formula, I think it was every 3 life equals such amount of card draw, because you're in the game for another additional turn to draw a card. Yeah. So when you're choosing to attack the Planeswalker, you're by virtue giving them another card to come up with a solution. So you're extending the game by the diversion. So that's I think they're interesting. Sure. So by proxy, yeah, they're a sub game. I think they're interesting. I love them. They add a lot of dynamics to the game. Some of them are backbreaking. Some of them are not. You just have to be really select in which ones fit your environment. So I think that's what we got. Which ones are organic.
And I think they've been around. Like, to me, this is another polarizing. Like, I'll go back. I wasn't playing Magic when Planeswalkers were introduced, but I am a consumer of content, and I love to read articles about history going all the way back to the origins of Magic and all the way through to present day. And I've seen a lot of commentary from people. We talked about Infect and how polarizing that was and still is to this day. And Planeswalkers, very polarizing. I've read a lot of comments back where people said they liked the Planeswalker mechanic, and a lot of people that said, or the card type, a lot of people that didn't like the Planeswalker card type, and it was just something else on the board that they had to deal with. Personally, I think it's about, I love the expansion and how Magic has grown, even in the last 10 or so years that I've been playing the game. But I think that Planeswalkers, want to go back, Derek, and I think one of the things that you said that is just so on point for this card type is it's big, it's flashy, it's cool, it's popular, it's the kind of card they sell packs, and they keep that gravy train going for Wizards of the Coast. Like, you see an exciting Planeswalker in a set, I'm going to get excited.
Yeah, powerful cards are fun to play with.
Yes, they are.
So we got some more speed bumps here. So one of them is we're going to kind of just throw this in there as a sub game. I run it in my Uber Bears Horror Cube that'll be featured at CubeCon, is the day-night mechanic. I think it really, what Derek said before is something I already thought of, is quite frankly, it resonates better in a digital environment because the tracking of day and night can get out of hand pretty quickly.
Very, very much
The best
so.
way that I have chosen to solve that is actually my dividers for my lands are literally two-sided day-night cards shoved inside of those tight little, all those extra plastic, hard protective shields. And I double sleeve them up so the players can all just pass them out because tracking day-night, it can definitely create some mistakes, right? I mean, it's easy to make mistakes on what's happening. You have to pay attention. And the opponent needs to pay attention to it too. I fully own this. It's probably going to happen. I imagine the word judge is going to get shouted a couple of times. And because I'm running double-faced cards, I'm running these. But they really fit my environment and my theme. And it really, that Daybound, Nightbound, I've tried to remove as much as the OG version of this idea. Whenever they just, at the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, then transform. I do have a few of those, but only if they're really, really strong. And you'll find the list. So I try to make it so that it's just looking at the one layer of the Daybound, Nightbound.
And Derek has mentioned this. It's something that both players have got to consider, right? It's not just a mechanic that exists sort of primarily for one player. Like, that's something that is a consideration for both players. Do you cast spells or not this turn, right? So, yeah, I love that point. I think that's that's got to be pretty high on the consideration of what does or does not. Maybe in my opinion, your opinion, whoever's listening, hit us up on the Twitters as to what you consider to be a subgame. But I do think that that's quite important because I'm going to agree that a subgame can't just exist for one player, right? I think it is. Am I wrong there? I don't know how you feel, but I feel that now that we've had this discussion more, that I feel that a subgame is definitely something that is impactful, maybe in a fairly consistent way for everyone at the table.
One last one too, it's a footnote, is talking about the coin flipping and dice rolling. Not a lot of conversation going on there, but I do support, in my two-headed giant cube, I've got Zender Split and Orin Eye of Chaos, where I'm flipping coins, and they have partner in it. So it creates like this interesting dynamic, this weird glue of having that set that came out, Battle Bond, had a lot of those partners in it that sought out the other partner, and it just makes for the lulz while you're playing the game. So these, it's cube dependent, right? Context always matters, whether or not these add or detract from your environment.
I actually think that based on this discussion, I know we've got it here, but I think just purely based on my education through the time that we've been recording this, I'm going to say I've had my opinion changed. I actually don't think these are very sub-gamey. I think just the action of either flipping dice or flipping coins or rolling dice, I don't think that's in and of itself a sub-game. So, I get it. I get it why you would put it in there because it's another like game piece, if you will. But I'm not quite sure they kind of fit into the sub-game and maybe just another game piece. And maybe that's another episode.
I want to bring it all back to the Charizard. I'm thinking
Charizard.
Charizard, yeah.
Charizard.
For 2 planes, you get a sorcery. Players play a magic subgame using their libraries as their decks. Each player who doesn't win the subgame loses half their life rounded up.
And again, I wasn't playing this time. Derek, I know you are an old player of Magic. And
it's really nice of you to say thank you.
Anthony's no slouch either. I'd like to hear that. Like, tell us on the Twitters how you feel either about subgames, right? Reach out to us, or tell us a cool story about Charizard. We got a cool one from Derek. I want to hear your cool Charizard stories. Reach out to us.
Derek, do you have any final thoughts?
Embrace them. Try them in your cubes. Don't judge them immediately. Play with them. See if you find enjoyment in them. And if they're fun, they generally always add a layer of complexity that can be tolerable or not tolerable, depending upon your play group or whatever. They might, there's a pretty wide range of like experiences that you can have with them. So I'm all for trying all of them, and I think you should be too. But I am a huge advocate of like today, and I think that it's exciting to see a world where we have so many options in this realm that we can run away with, we can tweak, and we can, try to find enjoyment and fun in.
Yeah, I'm keeping an open mind.
I'm working on it.
It's not easy.
Yes, I think for this episode, I'm educating myself, and Anthony is now getting his mind opened a
I'm
little
willing
bit.
to dabble.
All right,
I'm willing
good.
to dabble.
All right.
Take us over to the socials. You want to tell us about this Extra Life thing that we're doing here?
Yeah. So first of all, again, this is 2023, July. Hopefully, this episode will go out pretty soon. So if you're listening to it just after release, thank you for being a frequent and quick listener. We love you guys. We wanted to announce that UberCube is going to be at the Durham Convention Center. The Gathering Place is the event. This is on August 19th and 20th. This is the Extra Life, and it is in support of the Children's Miracle Network. This is a really cool event. This is a Magic event. It's going to feature a Modern 10K RCQ2 slot. It's going to feature a Legacy 5K, Pioneer 5K RCQ, 1K Pioneer, 1K Old School, and 1K Vintage for you real OGs. Derek, get over here if you can.
And Uber Bear's Artifact Cube will be featured. The times are being solidified, as well as Uber Bear's Horror Cube will be featured on that Saturday. And then we're going to break open a two-headed giant draft on that Sunday. Times or in work, still in discussion. So keep abreast of that. I'll make sure everybody knows about it. Pretty excited about this. Really hype about supporting Extra Life. This is going to be amazing.
Yeah, it's going to be a cool event.
So awesome, guys. You guys should be really, really excited about this.
Yeah, and there's going to be artists there. Rob Alexander's going to be there. Ken Meyer Jr. is going to be there. Vendors.
I'm willing to doodle on a napkin if anybody just walks up to me. All right, so you may have noticed that on our Buzzsprout we have a donation button. If you want to help the channel out, make us better, so I can hire somebody besides Stu, that'd be great. And and if you love the show, we would truly appreciate a 5-star review on your favorite player. Also, UberCube is an affiliate with Ultra Sleeves. If you use our code, you can get 5% off of the purchase. www.ultrasleeves.com/UberCube. And also, UberCube is an affiliate with Inked Gaming. If you use our code that'll be linked in the show notes, you can help support the show and get some sweet playmats, dice bags, etc. I pretty much buy out. We got to get some dope UberCube mats for CubeCon 2023.
Absolutely. That's where we're going to get all of our table bling for CubeCon.
Gotta bling, gotta represent. Also, you can find us at Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod. You can reach us UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. If you want to send us an email, we'll be willing to engage, talk about anything you want. We can forward everything to Derek's inbox. And you can reach us at Discord, #UberCube. And tell us about the Patreon, Stu.
Patreon exists. So once again, thank you to everyone, for all of our listeners, and I want to extend a huge thank you to Mr. Derek Gallen, once again coming out and hanging out with the UberCube podcast over here. Derek, it is always a pleasure to listen to you and your just phenomenal insights. Pretty inspirational for myself, especially as a newer player. I will say it's great to always hear from the experienced players and the guys who know a heck of a lot more about Magic than I do. So once again, I want to just say thank you very, very much for coming and hanging out with us today.
And
of
other
course.
than that,
it's a pleasure, guys. Thank you.
We're going to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube is
Happy
Happy cubing!